Stalker 2 is a beefy game, which means its main story is a long and winding road, even if you're not engaged with its optional content much. And though that main story certainly does take its time to really get going, by the time it's approaching its conclusion, there's little doubt left that things have well and truly kicked into gear and that the stakes are enormously high. Of course, like its predecessors, Stalker 2 is also a game that tells its story collaboratively with the players, so the way it ends is very much in your hands.
Yourself, Professor? This man almost got you killed, so it's up to you to decide his fate.
Let him go.
The game features 4 different endings, and which of the 4 you get is dependent on what choices you're making at specific critical junctures, which in turn also determines not only how a number of key conflicts are resolved and what the fates of several pivotal characters are, but also things as large-scale as the fate of the zone itself and how, or if, it affects the outside world at large. So yeah, it's safe to say that by the time Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl comes to a close, things have changed in momentous fashion one way or another.
Step back! It's time.
The first of Stalker 2's endings is the one that sees players tightly aligned with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, a legendary stalker who fans of the series will obviously be familiar with. S.T.A.L.K.E.R was the protagonist of the series' very first game and is perhaps more familiar with the zone, its ins and outs, and its secrets than anyone else out there. Of course, that means he knows perfectly well just how much of a threat the zone is to the world, which means his goal is now to ensure that it's kept absolutely contained and isolated. S.T.A.L.K.E.'s ending sees him stepping into a pod that the 8th member of the former C Consciousness was once supposed to enter. The C Consciousness, for those who don't remember, is the digital hive mind of scientists that created and once oversaw the zone, before its destruction at the hands of S.T.A.L.K.E.R at the end of the first game. The legendary stalker and a former ally of S.T.A.L.K.E.'s known as the Doctor, aka Dr. Kamenov, was the scientist who was originally supposed to enter that pod, but refused to. Entering that pod now will allow the person to become a link of sorts between the new sphere and the zone, and S.T.A.L.K.E.'s ending sees him stepping into the pod. In the aftermath, S.T.A.L.K.E.R becomes in charge of the Monolith faction and completely seals the zone up, so that no one can enter or exit it whatsoever, no exceptions. His reasoning is that without any interference from the outside world, the zone will be able to eventually get back to functioning the way it's supposed to, once conflicts within have sorted themselves out at least. Essentially, this ending sees the status quo reverted, more or less, to the beginning of Stalker 1, with the zone isolated from the rest of the world and Monolith viciously fighting to keep things that way. The second ending sees protagonist Skiff siding with S.T.A.L.K.E.R, another familiar character, and the protagonist of the series' second installment, who, by the time of Stalker 2's events several years later, has now become the leader of the Spark faction. As we learn throughout the events of the game, Spark and S.T.A.L.K.E.R's ultimate goal is to unveil the existence of the Shining Zone, a secret side of the zone that they believe to be an idyllic side of the zone full of light and life, as opposed to the dark, irradiated, poisonous, and deadly zone that everyone knows, and, well, loves. Okay, maybe that doesn't quite fit, perhaps, but they sure know it.
This is the dark side of the zone. But there is another, the shining side. It's here all around us, but we cannot see it. I wonder what's out there. Eternal spring, the Klondike of artifacts, a new home.
This ending sees S.T.A.L.K.E.R stepping into the pod, following which Skiff walks out into a gorgeous and vibrant landscape outside the Shining Zone, revealed at last just as S.T.A.L.K.E.R wanted it. This ending sees S.T.A.L.K.E.R sitting down at a campfire and sharing a hearty final conversation with allies and companions that he's gotten to know over the course of his time in the zone. Only for the game to pull the rug out from under you at the last moment and reveal that the Shining Zone is an elaborate, hallucinatory dream that Skiff is stuck in, while actually continuing to exist in the dark, dead zone.
We're all to stand upon the sea. Through death, through darkness thus. I choose the nets that swallow me.
The third ending sees Skiff allied with the Ukraine government-backed parliamentary faction known as the Ward. In this ending, Colonel Kirshnov enters the pod and brings about drastic changes. The zone and all of its anomalous effects are destroyed, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R has taken full control of everything that remains in its absence. Skiff has been promised whatever reward he wants. He probably wants a new home for himself for obvious reasons, but as the game concludes, the implication is that S.T.A.L.K.E.R is very much in control and seemingly using the sea consciousness methods to not only keep a watch on everyone in mass numbers, but also to potentially control people forcefully. What that means for the world is left wide open, but it can't be anything good. Finally, Stalker 2's fourth ending is one that sees Skiff allying with the aforementioned Dr. Kamenov. A certain point in the game sees Skiff deciding whether to kill the Doctor at Sturlock's behest or not. Deciding not to sees you moving into the Doctor's ending, which reveals that it was Kamenov who caused the second Chernobyl disaster in 2006 and the creation of the zone itself. In this ending, after the Doctor perishes in an emission, Skiff is the one who enters the pod himself, following which he chooses to cede control to the zone. What follows is a worldwide expansion of the zone, which sees more anomalous zones popping up all over the world. Meanwhile, it's also revealed that the Doctor is still alive, and that he was actually former Stalker Faust, whom Skiff had supposedly killed earlier all along. When Faust made the switch and adopted the Doctor's persona, it's all left up in the air. Stalker 2 is of course set to receive 2 expansions, while one would assume that GSC Game World also intends to make more Stalker games in the future. Which of the game's 4 endings will they be set after, however, assuming of course that the expansions will be set after the events of the ending, rather than as addendums to the main story itself. For our money, the Sturlock and Kamenov endings are the likeliest candidates for being the canon ones, though the latter is probably the one that would be more interesting, since it would allow the series to maybe even expand into entirely new anomalous zones rather than the Chernobyl one that we've already explored across 4 different games. What's beyond any doubt, of course, is the fact that there's a lot of different directions that the Stalker series can take as it heads into the future from this point forward. From arcs and plot lines within Stalker 2 itself that can be fleshed out and explained more, to new questions that are created by the endings, depending on which of them you get, of course. There's plenty that the series can dive into in the future. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.